Many people state that industrial design has a close relationship to architecture. I think myself that there is a closer relationship between sculpture and industrial design than between architecture and industrial design, because most of the products are seen from outside, whereas the real scope of architecture is to create internal spaces. One of my favorite sculptures is Henry Moore, because I think that his sculpture has a fabulous way of living and of changing once you walk around it. You find that from one side it looks sharp, and then it gets soft, and then it gets grim, and then it gets friendly, and it is like a film walking around such a sculpture. When I was maybe 14 or 15, I wanted to become an architect. Then when I got a little bit older, I found out that half of my classmates wanted to become architects too. And so I said, no, that's not much sense. When I had finished school, I really didn't know what to do, and so I started to study philosophy. And at the University of Munich, and a short time afterwards, I discovered this profession of industrial designer, and I knew immediately that this would be something I would very much like to do. And then my father said to me, listen, if you want to, my father was a painter. He said, listen, if you want to have such an exotic profession, that's okay, but I would suggest you first to learn something that you can make money with. And so I studied business administration, and I finished. I have a degree in business administration, but I wasn't really ever interested in business administration. My professor of business administration was a fanatic of industrial design. And at that time, really, industrial design was something almost unknown. And so when I had to write my thesis, he suggested to me, because he knew that I was interested in industrial design too, to write a thesis about the economical problems of industrial design. And I did that. And to do that, I had to make a survey of all the companies that at that time in Europe made industrial design. There were very few. It was Olivetti and a few automobile factories, and that was about it. And I met the people at Mercedes who were responsible for the automobile design there. When I had finished university, they offered me a job. And so I decided, why should I go to school if I can learn the same thing in a factory? And so I went to Mercedes, and I spent 2 years there designing automobile bodies, which at that time was a very small operation. I found out very early in my career that the most amusing part of the work is to design, it's not to manage. And so I decided to try to work mostly alone. And that's what I am doing. I have no assistants. I do not have an office in the real sense of the word. I am designing much fewer things than most other of my colleagues, but that gives me the possibility to select of the work that is suggested to me, that's what I would like to do. Whereas most of my other friends who have these sorts of offices, after they have enlarged those offices, then they need to find a lot of work to keep them alive and to pay all their expenses. And so they have to accept work that they maybe wouldn't like to do. Then they complain to me. They say, oh, we have such a lot of work, but then I ask, is it interesting? Oh, no, it's not interesting. Most of it is stupid. And I say, why the hell do you do it then? If it's stupid. Type of work that I have selected and that gives me the pleasure of designing myself and not managing that naturally gives me a great deal of liberty, and it gives me the possibility to work practically everywhere. And so very often I work, I don't know, I really can't work everywhere, in an airplane, at night lying in bed, or drawing in the snow. So I really do not have any division between work and not work. I work never and always. Most of the work I do is conceived in the first place in the form of sketches. These can be sketches on paper. They also can be three-dimensional sketches in cardboard or metal or in clay, but most of the time there are sketches on paper. And then, as soon as possible, I try to transform these yet very sketchy ideas into three dimensions. And most of the time I do this in the form of a model which is made by the model maker. Then I have a look at that model. Sometimes I throw it away and make something new. Sometimes I change it and I work on it. And that is a process that takes sometimes a very long time, because I might change such a model 20 times or 30 times or 50 times. And you need a model maker you are very much synchronized with. And I have found this model maker very many years ago, and he actually is a very good friend of mine, and he has a little workshop with 5 or 6 people that are working there, and I know each of them as if they would be my brother. And so we have a very good way of working together, because they know exactly what I mean and I know exactly what they do. And I think this is an essential element of good design. If I wouldn't have this model maker, I would really be in trouble.
Durante la quest'area sembra, no, che faccia il mestiere del genere. Adesso facciamo questa prova qua per vedere senza martellata che cosa succede.
Questo ambiente come lavoro è da 40 anni che lavoriamo nel campo e passano una catena di designer, più di 100 persone, un susseguirsi di lavori sempre diversi uno dall'altro. Io li considero un po' pazzi, perché il loro lavoro non è mai definitivo. Allungano, accorciano, buttano, ributtano, di conseguenza è una cosa che nasce d'impatto, non è mai un progetto disegnato e portato a termine. Il progetto viene sempre lavorato, elaborato, modificato fino al finale, di conseguenza è il più bel lavoro del mondo, perché si vedono sempre cose nuove, sempre cose in anteprima, cose che poi non tutte vengono realizzate naturalmente. Una parte viene scartata perché a ragion di logica, se si facesse tutto guai, sarebbe troppo lavoro.
This is the first model I made of the Alessi serving pot, and this thing expresses what I really wanted to do. I wanted to create 2 big volumes, one the pot and another one the handle, that is somehow talking to this pot, and a very subtle and thin connection between those two. I also want to have a simple but somehow plastically expressive spout. Neither of these things at the end I could get. I couldn't get the spout because that would have cost too much to weld here a piece of metal to it. I couldn't get this handle because of ergonomic reasons. And I couldn't get the subtle connection between the 2 volumes because of manufacturing considerations. Very often I take my ideas from the problems of production or from the problems of functioning or from the problems of handling. They somehow seem to give me a handle to which formal expression can be added, instead of regarding them as an obstacle. Because for many people, technical problems are an obstacle. They say, well, I would like to do that, but I can't do that because there is this and this and this problem, so we can't find a good solution. This naturally happens. And it also happens to me. It happens to me sometimes that I cannot really do what I want because there are technical problems, and I have spent years arguing with engineers about these problems. But on the other hand, technical problems have always been a moving element in creating beautiful forms. This is why I have never been very much attracted by plastics as a material, because you can do almost anything in plastics. It really doesn't pose great limits to production, much less than sheet metal or other more difficult materials. Very often things are made out of plastic just because they are easier to design that way and easier to manufacture without having other real advantages.
Non vogliamo fare il D si troverebbe un pochettino più alto, no? Quindi io dovrei fare di poco, di 2 mm, salire qua, fare qua, scendere un po' qua, e questo che si sposta.
Ma sì che si sposta, ma la lama va dentro, è un po' difficile farlo capire. Perché...
Ma io l'ho visto, l'ho capito perfettamente come funziona, lo so benissimo.
Ecco, mettiamo che questo qui, questo disco qua, abbia questo protuberante.
Yeah, this is a coffee pot or a teapot or whatever you want to call it for restaurants. This has been a very difficult project because we tried to make a product 30% cheaper than anything that has been done up till now. And so we were trying to make the things with as few operations as possible and naturally exclude as much as possible manual operations, which tend to become more and more expensive. So, for instance, the fact that this body is completely cylindrical derives from the fact that the polishing of the metal had to be done on an automatic machine, not only to save money, but also because polishing by hand is not a very healthy occupation, and I always try to avoid it. It also had to have such a simple form because in order to be able to be stamped of steel in one single stroke. And we were able to do that with a very particular technique, and very complicated machinery, which on the other hand gives certain limits to the dimension. So the fact that this thing has this form and that it has these dimensions is all governed by the technology of manufacturing. Another important factor in the design of these pots was the fact that they had to be practical to use for a waiter. For instance, my first model of this pot, which is now a little bit damaged, had a handle that looked like this, and I sort of preferred this handle to the handle we have today because I liked the change in the volume of this quite clumsy thing that fits well into your hand, and then the very, very thin attachments where you see all the hinge here, the attachment of it and the handle is all made of one piece. We've made a prototype of this thing, which you can see here. This is the first wooden model that we did. We made a prototype of this thing that you can see here. This is practically the same thing. And then it was found out that this might be difficult to get rigid enough. So I was convinced to change this form a little bit and make it a little bit thicker and more sturdy, which this is the result of this experiment, which I did not consider to be successful. Then the waiters came, and the waiters said, well, this is not a very practical form, because if I've got to put it on a table, to put it down on the table, I've got to make a sort of an awkward movement with my arm and my hand, because the handle is vertical, and while it is comfortable to keep something like this, it is uncomfortable to keep something like this. This was an objection of the waiters, which I thought was a very valuable thing. And So we came up with this model, which has a handle that, as you see, is angled to the body, and this now you can put down very comfortable on the table. The weight is like that, and so I continued on this way, and you can see that practically this is the final concept, at least. It is just made of one piece of sheet metal, thin sheet metal, and so it is very economic.
Una delle caratteristiche di lavorare con Sapper è che rispetto a tutti gli altri designers che operano in Italia, lui ha un grado di conoscenza tecnologica abbastanza approfondito e questo lo porta a discutere sempre in modo abbastanza profondo con i tecnici delle aziende per le quali lavora. Questo ha come risultato immediato di costringere le aziende a dei risultati tecnici sempre più all'avanguardia.
It is a very simple product that does nothing else but boil water and whistle when the water is boiling. Alessi was interested in producing such a thing, and they asked me to design it. I thought, well, this might be an occasion to make something a little bit funny, because I think it is necessary to have now and then not so serious things in your household. Many people consider the industrial design argument to be something very, very serious, which I do not. I think its main social function is to give the people some pleasure and some fun.
Per tagliare la goccia deve esserci il tubo, cioè quando si apre.
This is an espresso maker. It is a good example to explain how a form comes into being, because many considerations that went into the determination of that form are really visible. This really is a little steam engine, and all the other designers of coffee makers have tried to give that thing more or less the image of a coffee pot. And I thought it should look somehow like a steam engine, because that's what it is, and it's much more amusing than having a coffee pot that disguises the fact of being really a quite complex machine. This is it's a complex process that is going on in such a little machine. There were naturally many other reasons of giving that thing the form it has. So, for instance, instead of screwing the two parts together, I made an enclosure that you could lift with one hand, which is useful when the thing is hot. Then I made the base wider to have a shield against the flames, that the flames would not heat up so much the handle. And finally, another reason for selecting the details of that form was that it had to be manufactured in a very much mechanized fashion out of pressed steel in this specialized factory, which is just geared to do that sort of manufacturing. I have always been attracted by materials like the sheet metal. It poses limits to the selection of forms, but it can offer also suggestions, because these limits can become a stimulus. Alessi is a manufacturer who specializes in pressing stainless steel. And when they asked me to design an espresso machine, it was clear from the beginning that this thing would be as much as possible in stainless steel sheet metal, and made with their production machinery, which is very sophisticated, but quite cost-effective. This proved to be a very complicated job, because you now need more than 100 operations, stamping, cutting, and so on. And you need an enormous amount of dies and molds. But once all these problems have been solved, the production is very fast. And at least for me, it's also fascinating, because in the manufacturing of sheet metal products, where the whole production process is divided into many, many operations, you can really follow those stages and you can really see what happens. And it is always amusing to see these things, how they transform from a dish of metal to a pot, And then this pot gets, from a simple shape, more and more complicated. And at the end, you have something that you would have never expected could have been made out of a dish of sheet metal.
Dove sta prima di Baia? Peppa nein, Peppa nein. Peppa da, schön brav. Peppa nein. Peppa nein, nein. Peppa nein, Peppa nein.
Nein.
Nein, nein, Peppa nein. Peppa nein.
Das ist schlecht für den Käse vergessen.
Na, ich will kein Käse.
Du willst keinen Käse? Eine Schuhe.
Ja, ich auch.
Ja, I'm sure it. Okay? Jetzt habe ich weggetan, das ist viel zu los.
I made this fort, which, as far as I'm concerned, is just a joke, because our flatware correspond to the eating rites of the 18th century. Today, eating has degenerated into something that you do really very often in front of the television set or reading a newspaper. And I wanted to show that with a very extreme example. The example is eating spaghetti, which really is not so easy for somebody who has not been trained since childhood, and the Germans like spaghetti very much. And I just imagined the case of a Berliner who wants to eat spaghetti in front of the television set, and he really can't do that because he hasn't had enough training in his vacation time in Italy every year, so he really would need fork and knife and a spoon to cut those spaghettis and then eat them somehow, which would bring any Italian to riot. So what he needs is a real functional tool which permits him, without any education and without any effort, to eat spaghetti without looking. And that's what I tried to design for him, an almost automatic spaghetti eating tool. It's just a joke. Most people have an inclination to specialize in a certain area. There are people who design automobiles, there are people who design shoes, there are people who design lamps or furniture. And I have always found it interesting to change from one field to another. There has, however, been one group of products that has always attracted my attention. I don't know myself why, but these things are clocks. This clock has been in production for 22 years now. But when I designed it, this movement was bigger than this. And it was derived from a torpedo movement of the Second World War, because torpedoes had a clock inside, which they needed for their guidance and time explosion system. And these clocks, after the war, which were in ready supply, it was tried to find a civilian application for them, and this was an idea to make a table clock out of them. By the way, the producer of this clock afterwards had a lot of requests from terrorists for these movements. Even at that time there were terrorists around. In this clock, I first started to explore two things that I am still interested in. And one was to give in the form something which may be based on a practical idea of having the face of the clock facing the person that sits at the table, and at the same time creating a sort of a surprise, because you would say this clock cannot stand like this, it must fall down, but it doesn't fall down because there is a counterweight in the back, and it even can move, because if I turn it around, this clock will somehow, it will go back to its original position. And I have always been intrigued by defying gravity or working with gravity and then introducing into the concept of a form a movement. And I can show that on different examples. For instance, this clock, which I designed 10 years later, was probably the first electronic digital table clock. And I think it can be easily seen that this is a child of this, because the same formal concept has been applied to this thing, without the joke of the movement. But I was very much preoccupied in maintaining the movement that the seconds hand gives to the face of the clock. In any clock with seconds hand, you see the time moving. And when I designed this clock, my clients told me, what the hell do you need the seconds for? Nobody cares for the seconds anyway. And I said, well, if you don't have the seconds, you don't see that the time is really something that moves. Naturally, such a development is most of the time succeeding by steps and jumps, and in between something else might happen. For instance, between these two clocks I designed another one, which is this one, which has nothing of these concepts in it. This is just a pure form. It is just a semi-cylinder, or this is a cylinder with a semi-sphere on top of it, which is cut obliquely through the center, and then everything is milled away that protrudes the circumference of the face of the clock. And that's it. There's nothing more than that to it. But I have never stopped exploring the possibilities of putting movement into these products. So, for instance, another one is the kitchen timer. I designed such a timer in a form of a spiral so that when it moves, it would really change its form, because you would see how the time is getting smaller and smaller and the eggs are getting harder and harder. Another way of achieving this movement and also somehow the surprise that you have in a geometric principle like this is designing the objects or the instruments so that they can change their aspect. This, for instance, is one of the first digital stopwatches, and when you use it, it looks like this. The idea of putting a machine or an instrument into a box that opens, and when it opens changes its character, is something I have always found very interesting. It's not only because it gives you a certain surprise effect and some interest while you use such an object, but also because it gives you the possibility of saying, now I'm using this, and now I have finished with it. The form expresses the fact that some objects are used and some are not. I mean, objects are used sometimes and other times they are not. The same concept again you see here.
Qui abbiamo il coso.
The question can well be asked, why do some companies care to make their products beautiful, and why do most of them not? The companies who do it in the least part for commercial reasons. The well-designed product can become a sort of a classic, and then it can go on and go on and go on and become a big commercial success. But the simple fact that very many badly designed products are on the market proves it is by no way said that a well-designed product really sells more than a lousily designed product. The companies might just have a cultural interest. Very often, the small companies that still have one owner, one man who can really direct the fates of such a company. If this man has cultural interest himself, then he also, very often, he wants to sell well-designed, beautiful products. One example is Mr. Brion, who has a small company in Italy making radios and television sets. And he is a man who has inherited a great interest in art. His parents have been art collectors. He is an art collector, and he's interested in every aspect of culture. And so the design policy of this company is just an expression of the cultural interest of this man.
Questo di materiale plastico, no? Tutto di materiale plastico.
My opinion is that people are spending hours and hours in front of the television because it's just sitting in the middle of their living rooms. So when I was working together with Marco Cenuso for Brion Vega, we both said it is very important that we can design television sets that you would put into your cupboard, and you will pull it out only when you want to use it, and when you have finished using it, you will put it back into the cupboard. This is the reason for designing a television set with a handle on it, and that now is naturally a very normal product. At that time, nothing like that existed on the market. And the real reason for doing that was that I wanted to make a television set that you would not see when you do not want to use it, because it would be in a cupboard. The thing was a complete failure from that point of view. It was a big commercial success, but it was a complete failure from my intentions, because nobody would ever put it into a cupboard. I see it in every house, sitting right in the middle of the living room. Everybody thinks, this is a nice design. So afterwards it was refined, and now it is looking like this. Everybody thinks, that's a nice design. Naturally, I will never put a thing like that into a cupboard. That's what friends are telling me when I ask them, why do you have this damn thing in the middle of your living room? So from that point of view, it was a failure, but at least the intention was that. In Italy, there are very many people who are afraid of being kidnapped. Most of these people have armored cars, but for somebody who is not content with that, an armored bus gives more security, because any armored car can be stopped. But if you make a bus big and strong and very heavy, and you give it a huge bumper in the front, then you can push aside cars that might try to block your way. So this thing is really a very special vehicle. It has living quarters. It's like a land yacht. You can sleep in it, you can eat in it, there's a kitchen in it, there's 2 bathrooms in it, a bedroom, a conference room. It has all sorts of electronic gimmicks in it for protection and for entertainment and communications. Naturally bulletproof. Glass everywhere. And it was a very funny project, because even in Italy it was very difficult to find somebody to build such a thing. And it took more than 2 years to build it, because everything had to be made to order. So I found it funny to start with, and I got almost crazy finishing it, just because of these difficulties of building such a thing. This is another first sketch. To do this one, I even stole some Lego from my children. This is part of my ongoing study of urban transport systems. This was a project I did for the Research and Development Department of Fiat, and it is a small urban bus which can carry bicycles. You do not have a frame as you have in a bus today with big truck wheels, and on top of that frame you have a cabin and you've got to climb up. This bus, this was very low. You just walked into the passenger room and you loaded your bikes from the front, and the driver was sitting on top of your bikes so that he could see who was loading and unloading those bikes. That was because if the bike's son would have been in the back and you would have loaded your bike and then you would have been sitting in the bus, maybe somebody else would have unloaded your bike. It is part of a long study that I have undertaken for many years, and I'm still working on, which is concerned with the problem of how getting people from their houses to their offices or to the places where they work. Because I am convinced, like many other people, that the personal automobile is not the right solution to do this. Some way must be found to move people in their daily life in a better way. The whole project of this chair was dominated by considerations for automated, low-cost production. So I designed a frame for that chair that could be produced in a very high production rate by very few people. And the machines that you see here are able to produce something like 2,000 chair frames a day with not more than 3 or 4 workers. This naturally makes necessary a very sophisticated production process and very sophisticated machinery. The designing of systems, it's always like a Lego game. You have to design many elements that always can be put together and they always work together. And though it is very complicated to do and takes years of time, it is also quite interesting. I'm intrigued by solving these problems that are connected with those systems.
Now you're turning around. No.
Ausmachen.
I was asked about 10 years ago if I would like to design a lamp for working. And being asked that, I thought about the fact that I never had a light for working that satisfied me. So I thought, okay, I could maybe use a lamp like this if it would be according to my own requirements. What were those requirements? I do not like to work in an illumination as we have here now. I like much more to have the light only on the sheet of paper I am working with. This aids my concentration. This makes me somehow feel protected from disturbances, and I can much better work like this. So the first thing that I thought was that I wanted to have a lamp with a very small light bulb so that I could make a very small reflector that, as this one, could be close to my face and close to my eyes, but I would hardly see it. It wouldn't disturb me at all. Usually I am very disorderly. This table usually is much more disorderly than it is now. And so I do not have any room close to the place where I am sitting to put the base of the lamp. So I need to have a lamp that has a very long reach, and that on the other hand can be moved easily from one place to another. The usual lamps that have arms that are moving are clamped to the table, and if they are clamped to the table, I can't pick them up and move them. For instance, this one, which is not possible with one of those usual lights that are clamped to the table. And then I want to be able to move the lamp in any position that I want to have with no effort at all. The usual system to achieve a move of the working lamp is to balance the weight of the reflector, or to counteract the weight of the reflector with springs. But this is a system that works well in a lamp that is clamped to the table. If it is not clamped to the table, you must have a very large base, because you must at the end balance the weight of the reflector and the arms and the springs if it is fully extended to a length as this one. you must balance it somewhere on the table. And this is awkward because it occupies a very big area. So I decided that I wanted to make a lamp that would have every of its joints in equilibrium. And in this lamp I have 3 joints. I have one here, I have one here, and I have one here. This system here, this is a system in equilibrium because I have the weight of the lamp, the reflector here, and I have a little counterweight in here. So this is balanced in itself. This arm is balanced with this weight here, and all the rest is balanced again in this weight here. In order to make this lamp not too heavy, I really used extraordinarily thin metal, aluminum, for the reflector, and I used extraordinarily thin but quite exotic and strong plastic for the container. And naturally, I wanted to avoid to have along this construction a cable running. And having a low voltage lamp, there was no need to have a cable because I had those 2 arms, and building in isolators, I could have this part isolated from this part, and so I could run the electricity through the arms. But I needed a joint so that could transmit electricity, could give a minimum of friction, but only a minimum, could break apart under stress like this, because I can just take this away. But now the lamp is not destroyed. I can put it together again. This is for ease of assembly and also for safety of use, so that under a shock this lamp doesn't break, it just comes apart, and then you stick it back together. And you just have a vulgar, extraordinarily cheap snap button here, and that keeps the lamp together and makes also the electrical connection. So the form of this lamp is coming from very practical considerations. What you have is an opinion. You have an opinion of wanting a lamp like this. And I wanted to have a lamp like this for my personal use, and so I designed it, somebody produced it, and that's it. The reasons of a company to embark on the adventure of making good design are different. Making well-designed products is undoubtedly something that improves the image of a company. It shows that such a company cares for the things that they make. They just do not do them to make money, but they want to create lasting values. And I think it is well worth doing such a thing. IBM is clearly an example of a company that is interested in industrial design to show the world that they are interested in every quality of their products. I am consulting IBM on their industrial design program. They have about 50 product designers employed all over the world. And I'm looking after the work that these people are doing, and I'm trying to direct them, trying to establish a design policy, and I'm trying to see that the products that are coming out correspond to that general philosophy. The old covers were the new covers. I think the fact that these covers slide back, slide, I don't know whether this does it or not. I think it does. Now, the concept of these things, as you recall,
is that they slide back into here, and then they open up. And the theory being that they save a great deal of space. Because if you had two covers, you know, that were that big, and you open them up, it would take more aisle space.
Well, I don't really care if they save the space or not. I think they look nice. It gives it a temple-like appearance. But the thing that doesn't work, as far as I'm concerned, is the asymmetric division of the cover on the top. I think if we have a thing that is so strictly designed and has something that celebrates so much the computer, then we shouldn't have the flaw on top of it of having a asymmetrical cover, because there is nothing that indicates that this machine is interrupted here. If I'm not wrong, really, this is one part of the machine, this is the other part of the machine.
That's right.
If you wouldn't have that, then it would look like one machine. It wouldn't have, it wouldn't show that. And I think that would be much nicer.
We can do that. I can do that.
Are there any cases where the machines might be divided?
Well, see, there's a possibility, but that's a projected possibility. That's not real. But see, the problem is that this piece from here to here is one piece, and it's larger, as you'll notice, than the other piece. So that means you've got to cover this as a separate enclosure and then add it on to the other one. But it could be, we can change, see what we can do to change the tooling up here to see if we can fill that in. We'll take a look at it.
How are you?
Hi, I'm fine.
That's our standard unit emergency power off switch.
Yeah.
Right? And the thing I've learned now is that the new standard may require that we change this external shell to green and keeping the inside piece red. That's a new developing international standard, which is going to affect all the products that we have. See, there's two ways to look at this. It's red in the sense it turns power off, but it's green in the sense that it turns power on. And that's where the green came from.
Yeah, but I think it is misleading to have that thing green and that red. I think it would make much more sense to have that red on one side and green on the other side. The thing that, have you taken away this white line?
No, I haven't. They insist on having a white line there, although I try to eliminate
Who
it.
insists?
Safety, from what I understand. They think that it's much more legible with a white line there.
There is a Mr. Safety.
There's a safety department, there are safety people who review the product to make sure that it in fact is safe.
But did you tell them that it always looks bad paint?
Well, we'll find a way to do it. We'll do something about it.
But I think we should do that, because I think that might be safe, but it's not a design solution. I think we should have, that thing should, instead of being painted white and painted so that you really see that it is badly painted, it should really then be a piece of plastic.
Has some thickness, some depth to it.
A cap.
Yeah, very thin.
Yeah.
Or it should have be red and have just a fine white line in it. For instance, if you were to have a fine groove in it and make that groove white, which always would turn dirty naturally after some time, so it would be black instead of white, which would be the best way to do it. Yeah. But what I do not understand at all is making this thing green and this thing red, because that will confuse you completely.
Absolutely.
What is red? Red, I think, is on and green is off. Is that right?
No, green is go.
Not in general.
Yeah, see,
green is go in a traffic light, but on an electrical switch, green is off. Very interesting. And red is on, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, so we have to take a look to see exactly what that means.
So that everybody knows exactly every time if it's green, if it's go or stop. So. Very logical. It is a very complicated job, I must say. On the other hand, it is a very interesting job because it is something that I've never done before. I've always worked for myself or in connection with very few other people. And now I find myself in a job where I have to deal with many people. I've got to try to explain what I think these designers should do. And I have to talk to the management of IBM and try to convey my ideas about design to them. So I've got to do a hell of a lot of talking, where before I had to do very little talking in my work. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think we need the contrast, we need the richness of color and
I think that this is a lot softer on your eye than black, and that
Yeah,
you have made a step in the right direction, and it's a new look besides, and so I think that having to go through all these standards and to review what we're doing has been a very good thing. I think we've come up with something that's
I think
innovative.
and when you have a new standard, you always got an opportunity to solve new problems, to give you a new appearance.
No, I have nothing personally against the white line. I have something against the white line being executed as it is now. I think if we need a white line, then we must go into the cost of making that little white line in a proper way.
What I've done
I personally do not at all follow their thinking. I think that you see perfectly well.
I think it's an indicator at a distance. At a distance, you can tell whether it's on or off.
You must be in a very peculiar lighting position that you cannot see where that wing stands.
Well, any way that you can help to make it better, I think it would be a good thing to do.
I agree, Richard. I don't think it's necessary at all. The light catches the tip.
Right.
And,
you know what we could do as a trick? We could make this part a little bit oblique, so that it is not perpendicular, but that it is, for instance, if that would be tipped 30 degrees to the top, it would reflect from the ceiling, and you would get a very strong contrast here.
That's a good idea.
No?
Yeah.
And how
Could
far
you
is
try
it?
that and then ask your security people, make them a good demonstration, put a spotlight right on it, and just get it right into their eyes. The question if it is very important to have beautiful products around you is complicated. I don't think that it is necessarily very important. I don't need any good design here. I have enough beauty provided by nature here, for instance. However, if I've got to sit in an office without a window all day long, and I've got to work with machines and sit at a desk and on an office chair, then some pleasure provided by the form of these objects might be of some importance in daily life. It might make me feeling a little bit better.